What is up, guys? The very busy holiday season is behind us, and I hope you guys, had a good holidays. But I'm here to do a commentary about the recent controversy that's been stirring up about, the highly anticipated title Titanfall for Xbox One, 360, and PC, and how the player count is limited to 12 humans on the map, or 6v6, and the rest of the, little enemies you're going to be seeing on the map are basically AI controlled or bots, and a lot of people feel like it's kind of cheated them of their expectations. I mean, I can kind of understand why people are a little bit disappointed because when we first saw Titanfall, we saw all these we assumed were players, but they were probably bots at the time. We saw all these enemies on the map, enemies on the ground, foot soldiers. Then we had mechs or titans or whatever around it. There just seem to be so much going on, and now that we find out that's basically just going to be 6 humans on your team and 6 on the other team, it kind of seems to us like the conflict's going to be smaller in our minds, even though technically there's going to be more things in the map actually happening. It just seems like it's going to be a smaller conflict, and a lot of people are saying, this is a next gen or whatever because it's only 6v6. And I guess people are saying that because of the low player count, the game itself isn't a next generation experience, and I kind of find that a little bit funny because it seems like they're trying to justify next generation multiplayer shooters based on their player count, and that seems a little bit ridiculous because, I mean, for example, a huge, massively multiplayer shooter called PlanetSide, I mean, that has 200, maybe 2,000 players any given time, and that doesn't really make the game that much better or that much appealing. It's not even that great of a massive multiplayer shooter. And then there's the example of Battlefield 4 and how that's next generation multiplayer shooter, how it has 64 players on PS4 and Xbox One, and of course on PC, which is it's always been on PC, 64 players. I mean, when people compare Titanfall to the scale of Battlefield, or Battlefield does it better, it's got bigger scale, it's got 64 actual humans online. I mean, that's true, it does have 64 humans online in the match, but that isn't next gen by your argument. I mean, you're saying having a higher player count is kind of defining the next generation of multiplayer shooters, and Battlefield has been locked in the 64 player count ever since Battlefield 1942, which came out in 2002, back in the day before the PS3 and the Xbox 360. I mean, they have had 64 players as their limit since 2002. So, in that sense, Battlefield hasn't really, pushed the player count at all either. So how is this truly next gen outside of, adding, the more customization we've expected and have grown accustomed to over, the past generations? We can add mods and stuff, which we weren't really able to in Battlefield before. Much more customizable and personal now, but in terms of player count, if you're justifying Battlefield 4 as being next generation because of the player count, it's not. Sorry to break it to you, but Battlefield has been doing 64 players since 2002, so it's just not next gen. But I mean, I'm a huge fan of Battlefield, and if you've played all the Battlefields like I have, it's always been a 64 player count, and it's a very enjoyable multiplayer game, and I really don't feel like it kind of is attributed to the amount of players there, but it's just a very well designed multiplayer game, and I do feel like the 64 player count is kind of attributed to it. But if the maps don't accommodate the amount of players in it, that it's kind of pointless. I mean, that's kind of what deterred me from Battlefield 3 a little bit, is how much smaller the maps were, and I think it was kind of geared towards the console market a little bit more this time because, as you know, on the PS3 and the 360 for Battlefield 3 and for Battlefield 2, there can only be 24 people online in a match. So if you're playing Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 3 on, PS3 and 360, you're kind of getting the GIMP version on top of, only having a 24 player count max, whereas, on PS4 and Xbox One and PC, you're getting 64 players. On top of that, you're only running the game at 30 frames per second, whereas once again on the newer hardware, it's 60 frames per second. So I mean, there's some food for thought for that, but I just feel like a lot of people are making this piss poor argument about how the player count really determines the next generation. It's not next gen, it's just 6v6, and I find that a little funny because there haven't really been a lot of multiplayer games that have kind of pushed beyond what we've already expected outside of a few oddballs, like I said, PlanetSide, a massive. It's a MMO shooter, basically, so that's a little bit different. It's not like an FPS multiplayer game, what do you expect? But the low player count thing, when I think of it's probably kind of geared towards more, the competitive scene, because if you just look at, kind of what MLG, for those who aren't really, very knowledgeable at the competitive gaming scene, or some people just don't like that whole vibe in general, most competitive, like really competitive top tier multiplayer games are never high player count games. Like, sorry to break it to the Battlefield fans, because I love Battlefield 2. That isn't supported by the competitive gaming scene all that much. I mean, there's some competitiveness there. The people argue, oh, there's a lot of teamwork and stuff. It's far more competitive than Call of Duty or stuff. But you can't really argue the fact that Call of Duty is actually supported by MLG and esports, and that there are other and another funny thing is when Call of Duty is played on the competitive level. What's the player count? 6v6 as well. If you're gonna argue like, oh, Titanfall, Respawn, the same people made Call of Duty, whatever, it's 6v6 because it's Call of Duty. Call of Duty at the competitive, MLG esports level is played 4v4, ironically enough. And there are other examples of excellent, competitive multiplayer games. Halo is huge in the competitive scene, and that's always been 4v4, 8 players tops, and no one's never complained about Halo being 4v4, even with Halo 4, Halo 3, Halo 2. It's always been 4v4, and it's just the sweet spot like that. They know that's the sweet spot for perfect balance and competitive multiplayer, and no one would complain. Maybe people would complain if they actually made the player count a little bit higher, and they'd have to accommodate for the much bigger maps. But I mean, Halo, Counter-Strike, some of the MOBAs like Dota and League of Legends, which has like kind of a low player count too, and then it's populated by NPCs. Like, I'm starting to wonder if Titanfall is going to be like the first like MOBA shooter or something. That's what I've been hearing more or less, but we'll just have to actually play the game before we actually pass judgment on what exactly it is, how it's evolving, shooters in general. But I mean, there's plenty of top tier, very competitive, excellent multiplayer games with low multiplayer counts. And I guess you're gonna argue in the next gen they don't have high player counts, but like I said, Battlefield or even Killzone Shadowfall, next gen title, if you will. I wish you could see my air quotes or whatever, but I was doing air quotes. Killzone Shadowfall, a next gen first person shooter multiplayer game. It only has a 24 player count, which is the same as the PS3 and 360 version of Battlefield 3 and 4. So I mean, by that logic of player count argument defining next generation multiplayer games, Killzone Shadowfall isn't really a next-gen multiplayer game. It doesn't have a higher player count than we're already like experienced. So I don't really get how you can argue high player count is the defining factor for next-generation multiplayer experience. But I mean, if you look around, there's another aspect of Titanfall that people seem to be neglecting. It's like, oh, well, it's a multiplayer-only game, so it better have a high multiplayer count. You have to think that there's a little bit more to Titanfall than some of these people are, basically bashing it for. I mean, yeah, it has a 6v6, which is kind of a low player count, but there is more to Titanfall than that. And I mean, some people are saying, oh, people are going to exploit the AI and stuff. That's kind of an okay argument, but people exploit stuff regardless. Like, people will always find things to exploit, whether, they're kind of getting easy kills off of the dumb AI, or maybe, some people are saying the other extreme, the AI might be ridiculous or whatever. I'm not sure how the AI is going to work. That's going to be a very key and very interesting factor to see how the AI pans out. But if you look at Titanfall in general, there's much more to Titanfall than just a multiplayer. Like, if I've read, Xbox Magazine, if you just look at articles on IGN.com or any game website, there is a clear focus from Respawn that they're talking about. There's going to be a narrative background. I think you can kind of skip the narrative. Like, you can go to a playlist where they don't have, like, narratives and stuff, but there's actually a narrative background going on while you're playing the multiplayer game, which should be interesting. We'll see how that pans out, like if it's going to be like episodic or something, or there's just an entire story you just keep playing out and like the results change based on which side wins. But there's actually kind of a narrative, and I've read this constantly in magazines and gaming websites, that there's a narrative background while you're playing these intense multiplayer matches. And we'll see exactly how intense it is, because people are saying because it's 6v6 it's not going to be that intense, but we'll just have to wait and see. But there's definitely more to Titanfall than just the multiplayer aspect, because it seems like Respawn Entertainment is actually trying to add some like narrative background to it, and people seem to be like not neglecting that fact. I mean, there's no like narrative background going on while you're playing Battlefield 4 or any other multiplayer shooters, as far as I know. I mean, Star Wars Online or something, I think it has like an ongoing narrative, whatever, but there are other multiplayer games with ongoing narrative. But as far as I know, first-person shooter multiplayer games that I know don't have an online narrative while you're playing the multiplayer match. But we'll just have to pan out and see how it turns out. I'm curious to see what you guys think of this whole controversy with Titanfall being 6v6, and if you guys think player count determines, next generation experiences. Like I said, leave your thoughts and comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this commentary, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.